17 years in the Yoruba country. The Memorials of Anna Hinderer. Read by Buki Owoshini. Chapter 2. Voyage to West Africa. Sojourn in Abeokuta. Oh, who else shall have our heart? Shall we not with all things part? For the love of Christ our Lord, should it be a weary strife, should it cost no less than life, Christ is our reward. C.F. Richtown. The Yoruba country, with the population estimated at about 3 millions, speaking one language but comprising many separate tribes, occupies a region stretching inland from the Bight of Benin to within 40 miles of the Niger and bordered on the west by the kingdom of Dahomey. The gradual suppression of the slave trade opened the way in 1843 for the preaching of the gospel to the inhabitants of this country, whose religion is a system of idolatry, in which a multitude of orishas or idols, above all Ifa, the god of divinations, who is represented and consulted by means of palm nuts, are worshipped as mediators between the people and the one supreme God whom they acknowledge. Their religion is laden with foolish and cruel superstitions, even human sacrifices being offered to some of the gods on special occasions. Abeokuta was the first, and until the close of 1852, the only station of the Church Missionary Society in the interior of this country, with the exception of the neighbouring village of Oshiele. Thence, Mr. Hinderer, during his first years in Africa, made exploring expeditions in many directions, seeking new openings for missionary enterprise. In 1851, availing himself of the protection of a caravan of traders, he penetrated to Ibadan, a vast city, 50 miles to the northeast of Abeokuta, on a spur of the Kong Mountains, containing upwards of 100,000 inhabitants noted for their warlike character. Great was the excitement caused by the arrival of the first white man who had ever been seen in Ibadan. The chiefs expressed themselves as feeling highly honoured by his visit, and signified in council their willingness to receive Christian teachers for their people. The words of one, "Now we have got a white man, we must hold him very tight," evidently expressed the feelings of many, and Mr. Hinderer's numerous visitors in private, both chiefs and people, eagerly entreated that he would come without delay to sit down amongst them. After a sojourn of 5 months in Ibadan, he returned to Abeokuta with the hope of finding there such help as might enable him to enter at once upon this new and promising field of labour. But, as none could be spared, he proceeded to England in order to represent to the committee of the Church Missionary Society the greatness of the work which invited him, and the importance of undertaking it at once before the Mohammedans, who were seeking to gain a footing in Ibadan, had embittered the minds of the people against Christianity and persuaded them to close what was now an open door for the preaching of the gospel. The committee entered cordially into his views and promised him a fellow labourer, Mr. Kefa, who had nearly completed his term of study at the Church Missionary College at Islington. The state of Mr. Hinderer's health rendered it desirable for him to remain some months in England, but immediately after his marriage he prepared to return to Africa. His heart yearned after a people whose need of the gospel and whose personal kindness to himself had awakened his deepest sympathies, and he rejoiced in the near approach of the time when he should be able to respond to their invitation, which he regarded as the call of his Lord and Master. On the 6th of December 1852, Mr. and Mrs. Hinderer embarked at Plymouth for Africa on board the Propontis. Besides the Bishop of Sierra Leone and Mrs. Vidal, the missionary party included the Reverend R. and Mrs. Paley and Mr. Hensman, a medical missionary, all proceeding to Abeokuta, and Mrs. Kefa, Gerst, and Mesa. And though the roughness of the passage allowed of little opportunity for intercourse, it was cheering to all to realize their special bond of union in a common service undertaken for their one Lord and Master. A sketch of the voyage is given in Mrs. Hinderer's journal, in a passage which immediately follows the account of her last busy weeks in London, where she had parted from Mr. and Mrs. Cunningham. The subsequent letters show how acutely she felt her separation from these friends in their declining years, and the trial was increased by her knowledge of the delicate state of Mrs. Cunningham's health. Now came our parting on the 2nd of December. It was made one sigh for the land where all partings are over. On the next day we went to Plymouth, expecting to sail on the Saturday, but such rough weather had been experienced in the Channel that no steamer made its appearance. We spent Saturday evening at Mr. Child's, and much enjoyed it. The next morning we went to Mr. Hatchett's church. We were only there a few minutes, but I greatly valued those few minutes in my father's earthly courts. When it was announced that the vessel was in and would start as soon as possible, we were all in a great bustle, but enjoyed prayer in the Paley's rooms, and then in a miserable drizzly rain we went to the harbour. We could not be on deck, it was too windy and rainy, and as soon as we parted for the pitching and tossing, we could not be on deck. It was too windy and rainy, and as soon as we started, the pitching and tossing made us prepare for our little berths, where I had to remain 4 days. To the end of the voyage I suffered, but there were a few days of enjoyment given us. We had a little service once on Sundays from the bishop. The captain would not have more. We had a sad and godless set of officials on board, and were greatly tried by it, but we were not without comfort in all our trials. And when for 10 entire days the wind blew a gale, it was blessed to feel, He holdeth the wind in the hollow of his hand, and has power to preserve his children. And the thought of our friends at home and their constant remembrance and prayers for us was very helpful and delightful. On the 15th of December, when at length they were in comparatively still water, she began to write the first of the long series of journal letters to Mr. and Mrs. Cunningham, which are the chief sources of information concerning the early years of her missionary life. Having described a refreshing day spent on shore at Madeira, she proceeded, December 17th. We are tossing about again on the wide waters, but we can scarcely believe now that we went through such horrors before. So it is, pleasure succeeds pain. Our God gives us such blessings and sweetens our path where we could least expect it. And when prosperity is given, how soon we forget adversity. Well, days of trial, sorrow and suffering may be our portion during our stay in this lower world. By and by we shall be taken to our rest above, when our deepest trial will appear but a light affliction. What a blessed time to look forward to. Now we will be glad to do God's will on earth, to do or to suffer by and by to rest. Oh, that I might be able to be diligent and faithful in labour, as you, dearest friends, have been these many years, that my heart and hands may be ready as yours have always been. It will be sad for me if I have not profited by your example. But I do feel that every remembrance of you will stir me up to the love of my Master's work, which I trust he has graciously given me. With his grace helping me, I may press on and to the end endure hardness as a good soldier. December 23rd in the Gambia. Fancy the most lovely summer evening, our noble vessel at anchor in the stillest water possible, the little town of Bathurst lying before us. The most glorious sunset just behind these little odd houses, the sweetest breeze that ever blew passing over us. Imagine all this, and then you will have a picture of me. But to complete it, I am half lying on a mattress on deck, with my desk on one of the seats and my dear husband close by. Very few people are on board, for they are gone to spend the evening in the town. Christmas Eve, 1852. On board the Propontis in the Gambia. I have really touched the African shore now, and seen and talked with Yoruba people. Yesterday we visited the little sandy town of Bathurst, where there is a mixture of people. My husband knew his own kith and kin by the marks on their faces, and saluted them in their own tongue, which delighted them immensely. They crowded round him and laughed and shouted. When I was introduced as his wife, and they learned that I was going with him to Ibadan, their delight seemed to know no bounds, and they came and shook hands most heartily. I feel so happy to have touched African ground, and rejoice to think my little services are to be given for that land, but my heart turns to my friends in England with a deeper and more tender feeling than ever, and the tears will come when I think of tomorrow away from you. I think of last Christmas Day, and am thankful that I was so much with you. We went to St. Peter's in the afternoon, and then to several sick and suffering ones on the beach. 3 times I bent the knee with you that afternoon among the children of sorrow, and then we came across the Deans and talked of the present, the past, and the future. How little we imagined what the next Christmas Day would be. How much, dearest Mrs. Cunningham, will mind being away from you, and you will feel it so much. I long to hear how she is. Oh, I never shall forget tearing myself away from her, and shutting that door and my last look at you from the omnibus. Those moments of agony are only known to him who knoweth the secrets of the heart, and what a comfort that he looks on with tender sympathy and has balm for that wound also. On the 27th of December they touched at Sierra Leone. The arrival of the first bishop made it an eventful day to the colony, and the missionaries who accompanied him shared in the joyful welcome which he received. Mrs. Hinderer was interested in seeing many servants of Christ, whose names and work had long been familiar to her, and the hours flew away only too quickly till the evening of the 28th, when the missionaries for the Yoruba country sailed away. This time they were favoured with a quick and prosperous voyage, though the heat made the days wearisome. The dawn of the new year carried Mrs. Hinderer's thoughts into the midst of the old familiar scenes at Lowestoft, and she wrote, 3rd January 1853, at anchor in Cape Coast, Castle Bay. Can it be possible that 1852 has passed away and 1853 arrived? Yet so it is. I felt very unwilling to let the old year go, but it would go in spite of me. I rose very early on Saturday morning, New Year's Day, on account of the heat, and I went and sat by myself at the end of the vessel where I could see no one and no one could see me. I imagined you rising early in the dark and cold to go to the schoolroom. It is strange to feel such intense heat and to know how cold you are. How I could have longed to be with you. I did feel really homesick, but at such moments comfort is only to be found in looking up, and I did, from the depths of my heart, desire every good blessing for you and all whom you love, and in whom you take so deep an interest. For myself, I cannot say what I felt my need was. How sweet it was to be assured that you remembered me, and that many kind friends, in seeking a New Year's blessing for themselves, had not forgotten the missionaries, whether on land or water. How delightful is the thought that, though separated by so many miles, we are brought together in spirit at the throne of grace, where we may tell our deepest thoughts and breathe our largest petitions and not be sent empty away. I do indeed live with you, my beloved friends. I have never slept yet without dreaming of Lowestoft. On the 5th of January, the missionary party landed at Lagos and were hospitably welcomed by the Reverend C.A. and Mrs. Golmer. 2 days later, Mrs. Hinderer rejoiced in receiving her first letter from Mr. Cunningham, which had in fact been conveyed by the same mail steamer in which she had been a passenger, and gratefully did she appreciate the thoughtful kindness which had prepared this unexpected pleasure for her so soon after landing in Africa. Among all the treasures which each mail conveyed to her from that time forward, none were more eagerly awaited than the unveiling packet from Lowestoft Vicarage. Besides giving her tidings of the beloved friends, whose every joy and sorrow and care found an answering chord in her heart, and details of the work in which she had long borne a part, it often contained precious words of sympathy and loving counsels, which were no less valued by her husband than by herself. On the 13th, Mrs. Hinderer was seized with the fever, from which Europeans invariably suffer upon their arrival in West Africa, and to which, should they survive its early attacks, they continue to be liable so long as they remain in the country. This fever, which is caused by malaria, varies in form and degree from ague to the worst type of yellow fever, and where it does not prove fatal, it undermines the constitution and leaves it a prey to many other painful and trying diseases peculiar to or aggravated by a tropical climate. Upon her recovery, Mrs. Hinderer wrote to her aunt. 25th January, Lagos. I had a very sharp attack of fever indeed. Through the mercy of our tender Father, on the 8th day I was able to get up a little. I suppose few people ever had the first fever last so short a time, but when I got up I felt my weakness. My poor limbs tottered and trembled fearfully. I am still weak, and expect to be so for some time yet. Indeed, I dare say I shall never regain the same strength I had before. I believe no one does. one will soon forget it and go on by slow degrees. I feel thankful to have got on so far, and do from my heart desire that the life so mercifully spared may be afresh and more entirely devoted to my Master's service. The next letters tell of their 3 days' journey to Abeokuta, where Mr. and Mrs. Paley had preceded them. We left Lagos on the 26th of January and went up the River Ogun in canoes. There was much to enjoy. The scenery was magnificent, such banks, foliage, flowers, scented shrubs, exquisite little birds, red, purple, orange, yellow, green, besides plenty of chattering monkeys and parrots. The nights were the time of trial, yet we had the moon, and a most brilliant one it was to cheer us. The first night we had to stop at a little town and were allowed to pitch our tent in a small marketplace. Our men made a fire on the ground and boiled some water, and we had tea, which refreshed us greatly. Hundreds of people sat round to look at us and clapped their hands and shouted to see us eat. They were kind enough to retire about 11, and though surrounded by goats, fowls, and dogs, I slept soundly in our tent on a mattress on the ground. We were off by 6 the next morning, with all the people to watch our departure. The morning air was delicious, the water lilies most fragrant and lovely. The next 2 nights we pitched our tents on sandbags close to the river, and had several large fires to keep off the wild animals. Nevertheless, a baboon and some foxes had a great desire to make our acquaintance, but a man fired a gun and sent them flying. Still, there were many things that made a queer noise all night. The insects were my worst enemies. I could not close my eyes, so I sat at the opening of the tent, watching the moon and our black men sleeping close to the fires. We left at 2 o'clock on the 3rd morning. The moon gave us the opportunity of leaving at this early hour, and we parted with our canoes at a place called Agbamaya, in the middle of the day, where Mr. Crowther, his son, and several people were kind enough to come and meet us. The chief of Oshele sent a horse for my husband. I was put in a hammock and did not wake till put down on the ground outside the town wall. I could hardly believe that I really opened my eyes upon Abeokuta. The past has seemed so much like a dream. We had still to go 2 miles further to a house vacated by missionaries now in England, not very inviting in its appearance. The white ants had eaten holes in the floor and walls, and insects of various kinds haunted it, spiders as large as the palm of your hand, and many others. We arrived in the last rays of daylight. My husband began to unpack the stores and things he could put his hand upon. Our good boy Olubi helped him, and the cook killed a fowl and boiled eggs, which happily were to be had close by our gate. I had to get out sheets for our bed. Then we sat down to tea, laughing heartily at our first attempt at housekeeping. We went early to rest, tired enough, and I slept till the ringing of a bell awoke me a little before 6 to usher in the blessed Sabbath morning and to call the people to prayer, which they conduct among themselves. The school met at 9, a most interesting sight, young and old assembled together and as earnest as possible over their books. I thought of my own dear children at home, and tears flowed abundantly. I went to both the services, and though I could hardly understand one word, yet I greatly enjoyed it and felt that I was in God's house and that He was there. They sing while the people are going out of church, English hymns, and that afternoon they sang, "One there is above all others." That was too much for me, and I sat down and wept. The children looked mysteriously, and one little thing about 4 years old came quite close to me and looked as if she would say something if she could. Her countenance was full of sympathy. It overcame me the more. As I walked home, she still clung to me and then put her little black hand into mine and ran away. The next day she saw me and looked up, saying, "Mrs. No cry today. Mrs. Cry no more." Shortly after reaching Abeokuta, Mrs. Hinderer had a new and more trying experience than the first of African fever. February 18. I shall be glad indeed when the time comes that I can do something regularly and talk with these people and children. I find it true indeed that one must go softly, softly in this country. It is everyone's word to me here. I have been very ill again from a little too much exertion on arriving at Abeokuta so soon after the fever at Lagos. It brought on a relapse which was far worse than the first attack. I thought it impossible to recover, and looked upon myself as passing away from this world, but God in mercy has raised me again, and I get stronger every day and believed I have learned to sit still, and I find I am gaining by it for the present. My dearest husband was taken ill too, when I could hardly lift my hand to my head from weakness. We were quite alone, and he was delirious all day. The boys did their best to keep order outside and to bring what I asked for, which was little more than cold water. Oh, it was a sad day, but our Father helped us in our distress. What a mercy to be able now to say we have recovered and are both feeling pretty strong. I had a little walk this morning early and a ride this evening, and I'm teaching the children not to be afraid of me, encouraging them to come near me, that is, children who do not belong to the school. They cling close enough, but heathen children run away in the most ludicrous manner, as if I were a serpent, yet they like to look at me and come creeping. But if I look, they run. If I stoop to gather a flower, they think I am going to catch them, and then they fly. Yet this evening, when they saw it was only for a flower, with which I seemed very pleased, one was encouraged to gather some like it, and then venture to bring it to me. But she held it out to the full extent of her arm. I then persuaded her to come quite close by holding out a few cowries, after which she lay prostrate on the ground to thank me with her face in the dust. Modupa, thank you. Poor little things, such slavish fear. One quite sees the effect of slavery through everything. Their countenances speak it, but oh, what a difference there is in the countenances of the converts. It is most striking to look at them in church. It is wonderful, such relief and ease and peace, which tell loudly of a hope beyond the grave. February 23rd. The harmonium, Mrs. Cunningham's gift, arrived safely. You would have liked the sight of my first black singing class on Saturday, and the delight and amazement of these children would have amused you. Such a thing has never been heard. The people gather round the house in numbers, with eyes and mouths wide open. On Sunday evening our room was full, and we sang for an hour and a half. We did enjoy it. I only long for the power of painting to give you some idea of the scene, the black beaming faces. I kept looking up at your dear pictures, and it made my eyes swim with tears to think how entirely it was a scene you would have liked and approved. Ogubono, the great war chief, who often comes to see me, wanted to play, but of course he could not bring out a sound, so he says, "It is only wise people who can do anything great, and only the Iya, mother as they call me, who can make wood and ivory speak with her fingers." The promise of help and deliverance from all evil was again verified a few days since. A fearful fire broke out in the town, about 2 miles from us. 200 native houses were burned in no time. It speedily came near to us before we were aware of it. We saw little hope of our house being spared, as it also has a thatched roof. We turned out a few boxes, but all the men and boys we could get were obliged to be on the roof with water and boughs of trees to ward off the sparks. I gathered together a few of my treasures, the pictures, journal book, and Bible, and then with a deep heartache resigned everything else, fearing I should never see them again, and had to make my escape on account of the smoke. My husband led me far away and put me under the care of a native woman. We sat under a tree, and he went back to see the end. But before dark he came to tell the joyful tidings that the fire was out and our house untouched. Oh, what shall we render for these preserving mercies? Ourselves to thy service, gracious God. A few days later, Mr. and Mrs. Hinderer visited Oshiele, where a native catechist was at this time carrying on the work which Mr. Hinderer had begun in 1849. On the 26th of February, we went to Oshiele. It was most interesting going with D over the same ground which he had traversed, through some opposition to establish a missionary station in that place. It is about 8 miles distant, a most pleasant but narrow path. We had to ride one behind the other, our boys walking and 2 or 3 men carrying loads, for a mattress had to go, and food, and anything we wanted to make use of, so that we formed quite a cavalcade, partly through bush, partly through cotton fields and palm trees and bushes of every description. We set off, not as soon as we hoped, for a little storm came, and thus we were benighted. But Ulubi carried a lantern before me, and our horses are so sure-footed that I was not in the least afraid. When we entered the town, people came out of their little huts, but were disappointed they could not see us. Numbers of them had come on the road to meet us, but as we were not to be seen by 6 o'clock, they gave up all hope of our coming that night. A multitude of salutations were roared out from the houses. Okabo, I salute you for returning. Salutations for having brought a wife, and all sorts of things. In the house where the schoolmaster lives there is one room left on purpose for any European visitor. In this there is one little table and a wooden bench, something like a sofa, which we sat upon by day and slept on by night. So you see the necessity for taking a mattress. Happily there is no more furniture, or we could not very easily have turned ourselves round. But we were very happy and much amused. The chief came directly he heard we were there and greeted us heartily, and early the next morning our habitation was more than surrounded by people, and they were all pleased to think me a wonderful sight. I have a colour, as you know, in my cheeks, and this is such a novelty in Africa, that I might be made a little vain with the great and grand expressions of very fine, good, beautiful, were it not that I would give all the colour I possess to be able to talk a little Yoruba and tell them of something else. At 9 we went to Sunday school for a little while, and then to church, that mud church of which my husband was chief builder. It was extremely interesting going over those old scenes with him. He had been here, and I had read of it, and now we were in that spot together. He took both services, and our little room was full all day of visitors and hundreds outside, many, to look at the wonders of a white woman. We left very early the next morning amid sorrowful farewells. On the 9th of March, Mr. Hinderer went to Ibadan to make final arrangements with the chiefs for the commencement of the mission. He had also to provide as far as might be for the comfort of his wife in what was to be the first home of her married life. During his absence, she remained at the Aki mission station in Abeokuta, to which she and Mr. Hinderer had lately removed, when Mr. Paley entered upon his work at the Ikija station, where they had spent their first few weeks. Thus, she had the comfort of being near to the Reverend H. and Mrs. Townsend, from whom she received much kindness. She occupied herself in the study of the Yoruba language, and gladly availed herself of every opportunity of making friends with the natives. It was but natural, however, that her letters at this time should express some sense of loneliness, mingled with various thoughts on the path which lay before her. March 3rd. My husband leaves me, if all is well, on Monday for his first journey to Ibadan to make preparations. We have had the warmest messages from chiefs there, and I trust that by the good hand of our God we shall all be there in less than 3 months. We are now, I am thankful to say, both well again, but I am obliged to be careful. The heat is so intense, and I think this is one of the hottest days we have had. No day has the thermometer been under 90 degrees. Journal. On Wednesday, March 9th, my dearest left me before 6 in the morning. We both felt it much. God bless and prosper him. We have had such miserable noises in the night, wind and storm, and people with their country fashions, that I have not had much rest, and do feel it is the last time we must be separated, if possible. We must share together whatever comes. I have occupied myself as much as possible with reading, writing, work, and children. March 12th. I heard from my dearest husband. He does not seem to have many external comforts, but is content and happy. I take care of his little notes, which are a great comfort to me. Letter, March 12th. A messenger from the chief met my husband on the road to salute him. He sent him on to see me and to tell me how he was getting on. I told Olubi to ask him what the chief's words were to the white man. They were very good indeed, full of delight at the thought of seeing us, and if we want to send anything at once, there was a room in his house which we should have to put them in, as long as we liked, so that I am sending off things. 5 loads went yesterday, others will go next week, and if all is well, in 2 months from this time we and all our goods and belongings will be settled there, and by next January or February we hope to be in our own house. I am so glad to look forward to getting there so soon. It will be such a relief to my dear husband, whose calling is there, when the moving and unpacking are over, and he is free to go about his master's work. It is an immense interest going to such a place and such a people. It is a stronghold of the enemy, of war and slavery. It is a great cause for thankfulness to have such a welcome. But as my dear husband says, this is not all we want. We far more want that they should receive the Messiah, the Saviour of sinners, who lived and died and rose again for them. Oh, that the Holy Spirit of God may open their hearts to receive the message of salvation. You, my beloved friends and others, do and will unite with us in earnest prayer to God that it may be so. How great is the work, but it is God's. May we all only be faithful in the different portions of work appointed us, whether it be to preach or teach, hewers of wood or drawers of water. I only pray, God, make me holy. I am very well now, I am thankful to say, and feel the climate not unlikely to suit me. I am looked upon as somebody wonderful, being so much stronger than any white woman has been who has been here. From 5 to 6 I enjoy a good game with the school children at ball and all sorts of things, but you must know my play is not half as energetic as in England. Still, I am so thankful to be able to do this, and the dear children are delighted. This is a great encouragement for Ibadan, where the children will be frightened enough at first, never having seen a white woman, and as slaves having a horror of white people. God grant we may meet again in this lower world. I do intensely feel my separation from you, which nothing but the belief that I am where my God will have me to be will ever alleviate. The feelings expressed in these last words were poured forth more fully to another friend in a letter of about the same date, March 18th. Hundreds of times has the query, if not uttered, been asked within, how could I leave this and these? How could I, and how can I bear it now? And only the assurance that he ordereth our goings, and that he said, Go, and then led me by his own hand, and that he, our Father, our guide, our leader, can do nothing wrong, but that he doeth all things well, could comfort me often in moments of depression and times of pining for the sight of those so beloved. Thus have I been made to see the pillar and the cloud, and this makes me rejoice and give thanks that in the preparation for moving I only felt the guiding hand, and no doubts or misgivings were permitted to disturb me at the time. And now when I see what is the need, I feel that if I had 20 lives, I would gladly give them to be the means of a little good to these poor but affectionate and well-meaning people who, though black enough their skins may be, have never dying souls, which need to be led to the Saviour to be washed clean in the blood of the Lamb. But then again, I have been led to feel, of what use am I? Nothing can I do. I can scarcely even speak to the little children except by signs. But here is the lesson to learn. Wait, sit still, be patient. Thus I hope I may be preparing for the future, and if I am able to be of any help or comfort to my dear husband, who is bearing the burden and heat of the day, I may be thankful. And what a comfort it is to feel that those whom I so dearly love and who also love me have their heart's desires so much in and for this work that we are about, and that we are thus united in a stronger tie, a tighter bond. To her aunt, March 19th. My dear husband has been away for just a fortnight in Ibadan. Before the letters go, I hope to tell you of his return. Glad enough shall I be to see him again. It has been so strange to have only 3 young black servants in the house, but altogether I have been very happy, quite well, and very busy. But I shall be much more happy when I have him to speak to, and won't he be glad to get home too? Mr. Keffer will arrive, we hope, from Sierra Leone by the next packet, and as soon as possible we all go. It is extremely interesting thus going forth on an entirely new mission, but it is with a solemn feeling, into such a country among such a people and for such a work. Who is sufficient for these things? Not we alone in our own strength. We go not for ourselves or of ourselves. We go not to tell our own words, but the words of God, so that gives us a courage. And we seem to hear the words that were spoken long ago to Joshua. Have not I sent thee? Be strong and very courageous, for behold, I go before thee. And then our Saviour's confirming words, Lo, I am with you alway, even unto the end of the world. With such a commander and leader, what have we to fear? Only God grant that we may be found faithful, enduring to the end, like good soldiers and servants, and all, that the blessed Spirit from on high may be abundantly poured out upon us and the people, that their hearts may be open to receive the good tidings of salvation through Jesus Christ. Good Friday is approaching. We shall all think much of each other on that solemn day. It is one of my great comforts to know that I did value and enjoy the services of God's house at home, for nothing now do I feel the lack of so much. Home comforts are anything I can resign, and I feel the loss of them less than Sunday services, the feeding in God's house. I go, of course, and enjoy in a measure being there to look on and see so many bright, beaming black countenances enjoying to the full the blessing of the gospel of peace. Yet its being in a strange tongue prevents my benefiting, and I travel in thought to dear St. Peter's, Lowestoft, look at my Bible, and see marks when such and such a text was preached from, and try to think of what I heard then. In church I shed as many quiet tears as anywhere, tears of varied emotions, tears of a little homesickness, a longing to see the beloved ones and hear their voices, tears of thankfulness and tears of joy and hope. I have already a great many friends among the Africans. People come to see me and say wonderful things through my interpreter. I let them look at my things and touch them, which delights them much, and boys and girls come in numbers to sing with the music, listen to the clock, look at pictures, turn over my work basket, and laugh and shout at some of the mysteries. Their black skin makes no difference to me. To have them come to me to see them pleased makes me quite happy. I often saunter out for a little walk among the hills and rocks, and a nice little party surround me, and there is a famous rush which shall take my hand to help me up or down in a difficult place. I have sometimes gone back again to brighten the tearful eye of some little girl who thought she had almost possession of Mrs. And. I take a ball or two and set them running vigorously with their naked feet. Really, I almost think shoes are an inconvenience. They trip along so nimbly without them. Easter Sunday, March 27th. Oh, how much do I feel this day! My heart is so full. I do indeed desire to rise above things temporal and press onwards to the things eternal, to be risen with Christ, seeking more and more the things above. How many and mingled were my feelings on waking this morning, but very, very thankful to have my own dear husband at home, though I grieve to say he is in bed with fever from his exertions in Ibadan. On Monday I heard from him, giving no hope of his return till next week. Great indeed was my joy to see him return unexpectedly on Thursday evening. All was now ready for their removal to Ibadan. A native house had been prepared for their temporary habitation, and the chiefs had promised protection to the missionaries and liberty of conscience to their own subjects. But before they could leave Abeokuta, they were to witness striking and melancholy instances of the fatal power of the African climate. Some of those who had gone forth with them into the mission field were called away when they had scarcely put their hands to the work. Mr. and Mrs. Paley had already been so exhausted by fever and dysentery as to cause serious anxiety to their friends, and the only remaining hope of their recovery rested on a change of climate. In Mr. Paley's case, however, this hope was quickly dispelled by a new attack of fever, under which he sank on the 1st of April. Mr. and Mrs. Hinderer shared with the other missionaries in watching and ministering to him in his dying hours, and when all was over they took the young widow to their own house, where Mrs. Hinderer tenderly soothed and nursed her and helped her to prepare for her voyage, though perceiving that there was but a faint hope of her living to reach England. She accomplished a journey to Lagos and embarked on board the steamer accompanied by Ellen Apthorpe, an infant school teacher who had gone out to Africa with her and was now ordered to return home on account of serious illness. The missionary band at Abeokuta was yet further reduced by the sudden death of Mr. Hemsman on the 10th of April. Mrs. Hinderer was deeply affected by the removal of these friends at the commencement of their career. She regarded their death as solemn witnesses to the special uncertainty of her own life in that climate, and as urgently calling upon her work diligently while it was yet day. These and other like thoughts were expressed in her letters. March 31st. We are both, thank God, well, but we are in deep sorrow. Mr. Paley has been taken ill, and oh, how I shrink from saying it. I fear he has not many days to linger here. We hope and trust a change may be granted, that he may be able to go home by the next mail, but he appears to us to be sinking. The doctor is most attentive, kind and skilful, but alas, our hearts are sorrowful. Dear Louisa does not seem to take it in, but I think it is because she is too ill herself. Your valued letters are a double comfort in this sorrowful time. April 2nd. I begin my writing very early, but the work before us for this month is great, and life and health so uncertain. We have this day laid in an African grave the mortal remains of our dear friend, Mr. Paley. He got worse and gently fell asleep after 2 days of light delirium. We did indeed feel he was entering upon his eternal rest. His poor wife was wonderfully supported. I stayed with her today while the solemn ceremony was being performed. It was a painful time, but help was near. I read to her, or rather repeated little bits of the exquisite burial service, for she could not bear reading, and texts of scripture and hymns. We all feel very sensible of having sustained a loss, but his God has taken him from earth to serve him in heaven. How inscrutable are his judgments, and his ways past finding out. I could not but exclaim, "Thou didst well that it was in thy heart," as I gazed on his lifeless form. Though only permitted to see the land he loved, God has accepted the service at his hand and has given him his full reward in his kingdom above. It behooves us, who remain to look well to our goings, to be upon our watchtower, our loins girt, and our lamps burning. Oh, that grace may be given for this, but our evil, cold, and dead hearts come with us to Africa. We have double need for watchfulness and cultivation of diligence, for this enervating climate is indeed liable to damp our zeal, and we may hang our heads down, unless the same grace and help are given us that we need at home. Pray for us, that our God may do his own work, that his servants may be found faithful, that we may all of us, in our different capacities, only seek to do our Father's will, that we may live to him and serve him, and so cling to him that we need not so much these sharp strokes of the rod which he sees are needful for us now. We must now help the poor dear widow to prepare for her homeward journey and make ready for our own removal to Ibadan, which, if all is well, we expect to accomplish at the end of this month. 14th April. Much indeed has transpired since I began this letter. Scenes of various kinds we have been called to pass through. Our doctor, Mr. Hensman, was of a poor and shattered constitution, but I little thought I should so soon have to record his departure from among us. Suddenly and unexpectedly to us all, he died on Sunday about 2 o'clock. This week he was going to teach me so much for my benefit in Ibadan, how to mix my medicines, but how entirely passing away is everything in this life. It is well said, "Boast not thyself of tomorrow." What a break-up of all our party, so many in one vessel a short time since, now 2 in their graves, some in Sierra Leone, Mr. Gerst in Lagos, Mr. Kiffer going with us to Ibadan, Mrs. Paley and Ellen about to return home, only Mr. Mesa remaining in Abeokuta. Such is life, oh, the blessed hope of immortality. Oh, for a closer walk with God daily, hourly. He seems to strip us of our earthly helps, that we on him alone may lean. The arm of flesh is not to be trusted in, but the God of all comfort and consolation will not leave us. He will be our refuge and strength at all times, and in the midst of judgment he remembers mercy. Before this letter was closed, Mr. Keffer, Mr. Hinderer's appointed fellow labourer in Ibadan, who had lately arrived from Sierra Leone after his ordination, was struck down by fever. Mr. Mesa also, the other newly arrived missionary, fell ill and required Mrs. Hinderer's nursing care. Thus there was much besides the removal of their little possessions to occupy them both during their last days at Abeokuta, as the next extract shows. April 15th. Our house is looking very desolate. Much is packed, and now we must finish. I am sorry to find Mr. Keffer has fever. If he goes on well, we shall still, please God, start next week, leaving him here to prevent the danger of a relapse. We are nursing and doctoring him to the best of our ability, but we miss our doctor very much. Yet we must hope for the best. He can give wisdom and skill to the unwise and skilful. We have indeed had to dwell among solemn scenes and thoughts. Do not be over-anxious about us, dear friends. He who has helped us hitherto will still vouchsafe to be our guide. It is now Monday. Mr. Mesa has fever as well as Mr. Keffer, so that my hands are full. They are going on well. We must go away now to make room for them, and we shall have seen them over the worst. Mr. Keffer will not join us for some few weeks. How interesting it will be to write you from Ibadan. If it pleases God that I have health and strength and get a few people and children about me, I shall be very happy. And then nothing shall I have to desire but that we may meet again in this life, before we are taken to dwell together in heaven. On the eve of the journey, she wrote as follows: April 24th, 1853. This is our last Saturday night in Abeokuta. My heart is full in the remembrance of all God's mercy to us while we have sojourned here, and of all the events that have befallen us. I have been comforted by the collect for the day, 4th Sunday after Easter, in the prospect before us. May God order the unruly wills and affections of sinful men, and oh, may He grant that our hearts may be surely fixed on true joys. The text for the day too is appropriate. Our sufficiency is of God.